Recently, I found myself repeating the same argument again and again, usually to class cucks and anarchists, so I figured I should make a video about the topic. Today we're talking about why the revolution in Russia resulted how it did, and how Leninism that I advocate for is different to the Leninism that was implemented. There's also the topic of why Lenin there's also the topic of why Lenin did a lot of the things that he did in the Russian Revolution, like break up pre-existing workers' councils or introduce the new economic policy. But I feel the topic of was Lenin really evil, just like Stalin all along, is for another video. This is simply going to be a video to explain roughly my interpretations of what happened in the Russian Revolution and why they did, and also to make the separation between the Marxist-Leninist tanky idea of Leninism and the Leninism that I and other Leninists advocate for. And I'm putting that last part in because I find normally a lot of people who aren't Marxists, anarchists really, seem to get confused between the two and seem to think that, to support Leninism is to support what happened in the USSR and stuff like that. So I just want to clear this up and show the distinction between them here. So first off, let's have a really quick recap on what Leninism is. I know most of you already know this, so I'm going to try and keep it brief, but it allows me to move on to other points easier. So, Leninism is about having a violent revolution to remove the capitalist state, then replacing it with a vanguard state comprising of the most class-conscious people that led the revolution. This state takes on the means of production to stabilize the country after the violent revolution, to make sure people have food, water, energy, things like that, as well as to try and prevent counter-revolution from fascists and capitalists, and also oppress the bourgeois by redistributing their land and wealth. The state is intended to be run as democratically as possible, with pretty much no action happening from the state without approval from the working class first. Only things such as natural disasters or crushing counter-revolution will be things that aren't subject to democracy, because these are time-sensitive issues that require swift action and can't be slowed down by the inefficiency of democracy. The idea is that once things are running smoothly, the workers take on the means of production from the state, and as the bourgeois cease to be a class and as counter-revolution no longer becomes possible, the state pretty much loses all its purpose and begins to wither away over time. There seems to be some misconception that Leninism is about having an undemocratic state running for the workers under the premise of the workers don't know what's good for them, or other things like where Leninism is where the means of production are owned by the state permanently. This is simply untrue, and if anything closer to Stalinism, which isn't really even a communist ideology, which I've explained in previous videos before. This is in no way desirable to a real Leninist. Now, I mentioned that the state is run as democratically as possible under Leninism. As we all know, though, democracy relies on the population involved in this democracy to be as well informed and educated on what they're voting on as possible. Leninism, as well as all other forms of socialism, is also intended to come from a society that was previously capitalist in order to build up the infrastructure for socialism to work upon, and also for the country that it's coming out of to be first world. Russia, however, was none of these things. While it was slowly transitioning to a capitalist society at the time, it wasn't quite there, so it was more of a mix of feudalism and capitalism, where it still had more peasants than actual proletariat. It was also quite underdeveloped and would definitely be considered third world. Lastly, Russia's population didn't really know how to read or write because they were peasants. And how can you expect people to be able to tick what they want on a ballot box when they can't even read or write? Democracy just can't really work with those kinds of people. As well as this, it was a lot harder to get across communications and information back then due to lack of technology and the types of things that we have today. So it was quite difficult to actually inform people what was going on in the first place. So we had a large amount of people who were angry, kind of class conscious and fighting against the system because they knew it was bad. They just didn't really know what to replace it with because they didn't really understand. It's because of all these factors that socialism could have never really worked in Russia. Socialism relies on the people in the society to be as engaged as possible in their own workplace and their government to make sure that it's running to suit their needs. But no one really understood how they would go about doing this. As well as this, there was little infrastructure built up by the previous society for socialism to actually run on. So that's why you required a centralized state to quickly build up this infrastructure to make sure as many people were eating and had essential resources as possible. And this kind of infrastructure building at such a rapid pace couldn't be slowed down by democracy, especially for people who didn't even know what it was they were voting for. Had it been, I think even more people would have starved to death than already did in Russia. There was no way worker-owned means of production would have been able to work either, with these kinds of people involved. And I just want to say, it's not that I'm necessarily calling these people stupid, they just weren't educated. How you could expect, these people to work with democracy when they didn't really know democracy or anything like that. They just can't. The state did try to educate people to make socialism attainable. However, by the time that people were fit for democracy, the state had already degraded into what we know to be the USSR. However, by the time that the population was fit for democracy, the state had long since degraded into the bureaucratic clusterfuck that we know as the USSR. Now, you may be wondering, if it was that obvious that the people of Russia just weren't fit for this kind of system, why were they having the revolution in the first place? Well, there are two reasons. Firstly, Lenin probably didn't really think that socialism was attainable in Russia. He was more having the revolution in Russia to act as a placeholder for the global revolution and to inspire more developed countries to rise up and overthrow their capitalists. One of these countries was Germany, where a revolutionary Rosa Luxemburg tried to start a revolution but then died, so that didn't really work. And so because of that, and all the other planned revolutions failing, you just kind of had Russia left on its own, pit against all the capitalists of the world at the time, who were much more developed than Russia. If the revolution in Germany had worked, Russia would have had someone to cooperate with. This probably would have led to other revolutions in Europe too, where they would have come up and overthrown their capitalist states with a much more educated populace than Russia. And as they were more developed than Russia, they wouldn't have been pushed around by Stalin like the USSR satellite states. But anyway, the second reason why they did the revolution in the first place is because it was simply better than what they had. Even though the USSR was pretty bad, you still have to say it was a lot better than the feudalist Tsar that they had before that. In just the space of a couple decades, Russia went from being a basically irrelevant third world peasantry country to one of the superpowers of the world. And even today, it's still a force to be trifled with, really. Even though its conditions are still pretty bad, its human rights aren't really doing too well, it's still loads times better than the actual feudalism that they had. So you can kind of understand, even if they weren't going to go for the utopian socialism, it's still a step up. So that leads me to my last point. Leninists do still believe for the original plan of Russia, with the democratic state and the workers' own means of production and all of that stuff. As feudalism is pretty much removed from the world as we know it today, the types of problems that were faced in Russia are unlikely to come up again, as pretty much everyone in the world where revolutions can be happening can read or write, and we have much better communication tools and technology such as the internet to inform and educate people a lot easier. We still believe that certain means of production do need to be taken over after a revolution to just make sure that people are eating and have all those essential resources. However, this would be temporary, and the more developed the country that has the revolution, the shorter amount of time the means of production would need to be taken on by the state. So I hope that gave you guys a general overview on the Russian Revolution and its relation to Leninism. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments, but apart from that, thanks for watching.